Decoded.
Okay, so picture this, right? You're thinking about a memory, some event from your past, and you were like totally positive it happened exactly the way you remember it. No question.
Happens to all of us, that feeling of certainty, right? Like our memories are these perfect little recordings tucked away in our brains.
Right. But what if I told you, what if those memories, the ones you're so sure about, maybe they're not quite as accurate as you think?
Yeah, buckle up, folks, because today we're going to take a trip down memory lane, and trust me, there are going to be some unexpected detours.
Exactly. So that's our book for today, Memory Lane, by Ciara Greene and Julia Porio. We're here to decode this thing, pull out the good stuff about how memory really works, get those aha moments, and maybe even walk away thinking differently about how your own mind plays tricks on you.
Tricks is a good word for it, because the first myth we gotta bust is this idea that memory is like some flawless recording device capturing everything perfectly.
Oh, yeah. I totally used to think that. Like my brain was a video camera, just hitting record on everything I see and do.
Nope, not even close. The reality is way more interesting. Every time you try to remember something, your brain's actually piecing it together like a puzzle, bits and pieces from different places, and sometimes even filling in the gaps with, well, guesswork.
So it's more of a reconstruction.
Yeah.
Like a rough draft that gets edited every time you revisit it.
Exactly. It's a process called reconstruction, and it's happening all the time without us even realizing it. And the cool thing is, this isn't some design flaw. It's actually a really efficient way for our brains to manage the insane amount of information we encounter every day.
Oh, okay. I'm starting to see the logic here. Like, why waste precious brain power storing every detail when you can just remember the gist, the important stuff?
Right. Our memories are designed to evolve, to prioritize what's likely to be useful down the road and let go of the clutter. Think about it. If you tried to remember everything you've ever experienced, you'd be overloaded.
Total brain meltdown. But this whole fallible memory thing does raise a bit of a red flag, especially when we're talking about things like, eyewitness testimony in legal cases. If our memories are so easily tweaked, how can we rely on them for something that serious?
It's a valid concern, no doubt. But the authors of Memory Lane are careful to point out that just because memory is susceptible to distortion doesn't mean it's completely unreliable. In most cases, our memories are pretty accurate, especially for the big picture stuff.
Okay, so it's more like a spectrum of reliability, not an all-or-nothing situation.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that victims of crimes or traumatic events are no more likely to have faulty memories than anyone else. While we should always be critical thinkers, we shouldn't automatically dismiss someone's experience just because memory can be a bit fuzzy sometimes.
That's a really important point to make. Okay, so how about we dive into some of the ways we've tried to understand memory over the years? The book mentions some pretty wild metaphors that people use to explain how the mind works.
Oh yeah, some real head scratchers. Back in the day, people would use the latest tech as a way to make sense of the brain. For example, in the 19th century, with the rise of hydraulic systems, thinkers like Freud imagined the mind as this network of pipes and valves, with psychic energy flowing through like water pressure.
So like emotions building up and getting redirected, kind of like a plumbing system.
Exactly. And then as telephones became all the rage in the early 20th century, behaviorists started viewing the mind as this giant switchboard where inputs and outputs were simply connected, like an operator patching calls through.
Fascinating how our understanding of the brain has mirrored the technology of the time. But these metaphors, while creative, they're obviously not quite how things work.
Right. And today, we have a much more nuanced view of memory, thanks to decades of research. Memory Lane lays out a really helpful framework for thinking about the different types of memory and how they interact.
Okay, so break it down for us. What are the different memory flavors?
Well, we start with sensory memory. Think of it like that fleeting impression you get when you see or hear something. It lasts for just a few seconds, but it's the first stage of information processing.
Got it. So like a quick snapshot that fades almost immediately.
Precisely. Then we have working memory. This is your mental workspace where you actively hold and manipulate information. It's essential for things like following conversations, solving problems, or even just remembering a phone number long enough to dial it.
Okay, so it's like our short-term mental juggling act.
Exactly. And it's limited in capacity, which is why it's so easy to get distracted or forget things if we're trying to juggle too many thoughts at once. Then we have the big one, long-term memory. This is where all our experiences, knowledge, and skills are stored for the long haul.
The vast mental library, right?
Hmm.
But memory lane makes a distinction between two main types of long-term memory, right? Procedural and declarative.
You got it. Procedural memory is all about knowing how to do things, those skills and habits that become so ingrained you can do them almost automatically.
Like riding a bike or tying your shoes. You don't have to consciously think about every step, you just do it.
Precisely. It's like your body just remembers. The book uses a great example with typing. Think about how you can effortlessly type your name without even looking at the keyboard. But if I ask you to point to the I or the B key on a blank keyboard, you might struggle. It's implicit knowledge embedded in your muscle memory.
That's such a good illustration. And then there's declarative memory, which is all about knowing what. It's the stuff you can consciously recall and talk about.
Right, and this is further divided into semantic memory, which is your general knowledge about the world, facts and concepts, and episodic memory, which is all about your personal experiences, those events and moments that make up your unique life story.
So semantic memory would be like knowing that Paris is the capital of France, while episodic memory would be remembering that amazing trip you took to Paris last summer.
Exactly. And memory lane really dives deep into episodic memory, those personal recollections that shape our sense of self.
Now, to form those new episodic memories, there's a key player in the brain we need to talk about, the hippocampus.
Ah, yes, the hippocampus. It's located deep within the brain, in the medial temporal lobe, and it's essential for encoding new memories, those personal experiences that become part of our life story.
The book highlights its importance through the case of Henry Molaison, or HM. This is such a famous case in neuroscience.
It really is. HM underwent surgery in the 1950s to treat severe epilepsy, and sadly, it resulted in him losing the ability to form new memories. He lived in a perpetual present, unable to remember anything that happened after his surgery. It was like waking up from a dream every day, with no continuity, no sense of a personal past.
That's just heartbreaking. It really underscores how crucial the hippocampus is for creating those new memory connections that allow us to build a sense of self over time.
Absolutely. And speaking of building, memory lane uses a really clever analogy to explain how our memories work. The Lego tower.
Oh yeah, I love this analogy. Tell us about it.
So imagine each memory you have as a Lego tower. Every time you recall that memory, you're essentially taking the tower apart and rebuilding it.
Okay, I'm following. So the act of remembering is like a reconstruction process.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Each time you rebuild that Lego tower, there's a chance that some of the bricks might get swapped out or rearranged. You might add a new brick based on something someone told you, or you might misremember a detail and use the wrong color brick. This process is called reconsolidation.
So our memories aren't fixed. They can change over time based on how we recall them and the new information we encounter.
Precisely. It's like a game of memory telephone, where the story gets slightly altered with each retelling. The book gives a simple but powerful example. Let's say you vaguely remember Sarah handing you a drink at a party, but later someone insists it was actually John who gave you the drink.
Ah, I see where this is going. With each subsequent recall, that John brick in your memory tower gets a little more firmly cemented, while the Sarah brick starts to fade.
Exactly. And those memory towers aren't built in isolation. They're influenced by our existing knowledge and beliefs, which memory lane refers to as schemas.
Okay, schemas. Remind us what those are again.
Schemas are like mental frameworks that help us organize and interpret information. They're based on our past experiences, and they tell us what to expect in certain situations. Think about going to a restaurant. You have a schema for how that experience typically unfolds. You get seated, you look at a menu, you order food, you eat, you pay the bill. This schema helps you navigate the situation smoothly.
Right, it's like a mental shortcut that prevents us from having to figure everything out from scratch every time.
Exactly. But schemas can also lead to memory distortions. Memory lane uses the classic example of a passage about washing clothes. If you read the passage without any context, it seems really confusing and hard to remember. But if you're told beforehand that the passage is about washing clothes, suddenly everything clicks into place and you remember much more.
Oh, that's right. It's like having the title of the story before you read it. It gives you that framework, that schema to hang the details on.
Exactly. And this shows how our pre-existing knowledge and expectations can influence how we encode new information, which can then affect how we recall it later. Now, given that our memories are so malleable and influenced by schemas, you might wonder if there are people out there with truly perfect memories. And Memory Lane explores the fascinating case of Jill Price and highly superior autobiographical memory, or HSM.
Wait, HSM. People with this condition, they can remember almost every detail of their lives.
It's pretty incredible. They can recall specific events from almost any day of their lives with incredible detail and accuracy. It sounds like a superpower, right?
It does. I'd love to be able to remember every amazing meal I've ever eaten, every funny joke I've ever heard.
I hear you. But memory lane makes a really important point. Having HSM isn't all sunshine and roses. Jill Price herself described her memory as nonstop, uncontrollable, and totally exhausting. It was a burden, not a blessing. She was constantly bombarded with memories, both good and bad, and it could be overwhelming and even debilitating.
Wow, that's a huge perspective shift. It's like the old saying, be careful what you wish for.
Right, it highlights the fact that more memory isn't always better. And it also reminds us that our memories are shaped by our emotions and biases. Memory lane talks about memory distortion and self-serving bias.
Self-serving bias, that sounds kind of sneaky.
It is. It basically means that we tend to remember things in a way that makes us look good. We downplay our mistakes, exaggerate our successes, and generally paint a rosier picture of the past.
Oh yeah, I've totally done that. Like, remember that time I aced that presentation? In reality, it was probably just okay, but in my memory, I'm a rock star.
Exactly. The book mentions a study where people played a dictator game where they had to decide how much money to share with another person. Afterward, they were asked to recall how much they'd given. And guess what? People who felt they'd acted selfishly tended to remember being more generous than they actually were. It's like we subconsciously rewrite history to align with how we want to see ourselves.
That's so fascinating. It's like our brains are constantly trying to protect our egos. And there's also that study about the Serenity Prayer.
Oh, yeah, that one's a classic. Researchers gave people negative feedback about their personality traits, some of which were presented as fixed, like intelligence, and some as malleable, like creativity. And guess what they found?
I'm on the edge of my seat.
People tended to forget the negative feedback about traits they believed were fixed, but they remembered the negative feedback about traits they thought they could change.
Okay, that makes sense. If you think there's nothing you can do about a negative trait, why dwell on it?
Exactly. It's like our brains are selectively filtering information to maintain a sense of hope and control. So all of this has some pretty serious implications, especially when it comes to eyewitness testimony. Memory lane asks a crucial question. Why aren't we better eyewitnesses?
Yeah, if our memories are so easily influenced, shouldn't we be taking that into account when we're relying on them for legal cases?
Absolutely. And the statistics are pretty sobering. The Innocence Project has found that around 70% of wrongful convictions that were later overturned by DNA evidence involved mistaken eyewitness identification.
70%, that's a huge number. It means that a lot of innocent people are being wrongly convicted based on faulty memories.
It's a major problem. And Memory Lane tells the story of Jennifer Thompson and Ronald Cotton, a case that really highlights the fragility of eyewitness memory. Jennifer was raped in 1984, and she confidently identified Ronald as her attacker. He was convicted and spent 11 years in prison before DNA evidence proved his innocence.
That's just tragic, and it shows how even when eyewitnesses are absolutely certain, their memories can still be wrong.
It's a powerful reminder that confidence doesn't always equal accuracy. So what are some of the factors that contribute to these eyewitness errors? Well, Memory Lane delves into attentional limitations, starting with inattentional blindness.
Inattentional blindness, that sounds familiar.
It's the phenomenon where we fail to notice something that's right in front of us because our attention is focused elsewhere. The book mentions that famous experiment at Western Washington University where people were so focused on counting basketball passes that they completely missed a gorilla walking through the scene.
Oh yeah, I've seen that video. It's mind-blowing how we can be so oblivious to things that are right in our field of vision.
It really is, and it highlights how selective our attention is. We're not designed to take in every single detail of our environment. We focus on what we deem important and filter out the rest. But this filtering process can backfire when it comes to eyewitness testimony.
Right. If you're not paying attention to the right details, you might miss crucial information that could help you identify a suspect later.
Exactly. And it's not just inattentional blindness. There's also change blindness, where we fail to notice changes in our environment even when they're pretty significant.
The book describes that study where researchers swapped places with each other while asking someone for directions. And many people didn't even realize they were now talking to a different person.
It's crazy, right? And it shows how our brains are constantly making assumptions and filling in the gaps based on our expectations. And those expectations are heavily influenced by our schemas.
Ah, schemas again. So how do they come into play with eyewitness testimony?
Well, schemas can lead us to misremember details in a way that fits our pre-existing beliefs about certain people or situations. Memory Lane uses the example of the classic War of the Ghosts story. It's a Native American folktale that has been retold and passed down through generations. And researchers have found that when people from different cultures retell the story, they tend to distort it in ways that align with their own cultural schemas.
So if you have a schema about Native American culture being mystical and spiritual, you might embellish the supernatural elements of the story.
Exactly. And this shows how our cultural biases and preconceptions can subtly shape how we remember events, even when we think we're being objective. Then there's source confusion, which is another big culprit in eyewitness misidentification.
Source confusion.
Hmm.
Refresh my memory on what that is.
It's basically when we misremember where we learned something or who told us something. The book gives the amazing example of Donald Thompson, a psychologist who was actually accused of a crime that took place while he was on live television, discussing the fallibility of eyewitness testimony.
Wait, seriously? That's incredible.
It is. The victim had seen him on TV earlier that day and misattributed her memory of seeing him to the actual crime.
Wow, talk about ironic. It's a perfect illustration of how easily we can get our wires crossed when it comes to the source of our memories.
It really is. And then there's the issue of facial recognition. We often think we're pretty good at remembering faces, but studies show that we're actually not that great, especially when it comes to unfamiliar faces.
Oh yeah, I'm terrible with names and faces. I can meet someone at a party, have a great conversation, and then completely blank on who they are the next day.
It happens to the best of us, and unfortunately, this has big implications for eyewitness testimony. Research has shown that there's a weak correlation between confidence and accuracy in eyewitness identifications, especially in less than ideal viewing conditions.
So even if a witness is 100% sure they've identified the right person, there's still a good chance they could be wrong.
Sadly, that's the case. And to make matters worse, there's also the cross-race effect, where people tend to be better at recognizing faces of their own race than faces of other races.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that. It's like our brains are more attuned to the subtle facial features of people who look like us.
Exactly. And studies have shown that this effect can lead to both higher rates of correct identification and higher rates of false identification, depending on whether the eyewitness and the suspect are of the same race or different races.
So it's a double-edged sword. And all of this points to the fact that memory is way more fluid and fallible than we tend to believe. And that brings us to another key concept discussed in Memory Lane: post-event information.
Ah, yes, post-event information. This refers to any information we encounter after an event that can potentially alter our memory of that event.
So like if you witness a car accident,
Yeah.
and then later you hear someone talking about it and they mention a detail that you didn't actually see, that new information could get incorporated into your memory.
Precisely. And this can happen without us even realizing it. Memory Lane describes an experiment where students witnessed a staged event, like someone stealing a handbag. Later, some of the students were given misleading information about what they had seen, like the color of the handbag or the thief's clothing.
And I'm guessing that this misleading information influenced their memories.
You bet it did. When they were later asked to recall the event, many of the students incorporated the false details into their accounts, even though they hadn't actually seen those things.
It's kind of scary to think about how easily our memories can be manipulated.
It is. And Memory Lane highlights the pioneering work of Elizabeth Loftus, a psychologist who has spent decades researching the malleability of memory. Her famous car crash study is a classic example of how subtle changes in language can influence our recollections.
Remind us about that study again.
Sure. In the study, participants watched a video of a car accident and were then asked questions about what they had seen. But the wording of the questions was subtly manipulated. Some participants were asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? While others were asked, how fast were the cars going when they contacted each other?
And I'm guessing that the word smashed made people think the cars were going faster.
You got it. Not only did the participants who heard the word smashed give higher speed estimates, but they were also more likely to falsely remember seeing broken glass at the scene, even though there was none.
That's crazy. It shows how a single word can change the entire narrative of a memory.
It really is. And Loftus's research has had a profound impact on our understanding of eyewitness testimony and the dangers of leading questions. Even something as seemingly insignificant as changing A to the when asking about a detail can influence what people remember.
So instead of asking, did you see a broken headlight, you ask, did you see the broken headlight?
Exactly. And that subtle shift can implant a false detail into someone's memory.
Wow, this is all pretty mind-blowing stuff. It really makes you question the reliability of your own memories.
It does, and memory lane doesn't shy away from the implications of this research. It raises concerns about the way police interviews are conducted, the use of leading questions in legal settings, and even the potential for political manipulation through the spread of misinformation.
It's a reminder that we need to be critical thinkers, to question our own assumptions, and to be aware of the many ways our memories can be distorted.
Couldn't agree more. So, to sum it all up, memory lane offers a fascinating and sometimes unsettling journey into the inner workings of our minds. It challenges our assumptions about the reliability of memory and reveals the many factors that can shape and reshape our recollections, both for better and for worse.
It's a powerful reminder that memory is not a perfect recording of the past. It's a dynamic, ever-evolving process that's influenced by our attention, our schemas, our emotions, and the information we encounter after an event. And while these so-called flaws might make memory seem unreliable, they're actually part of what makes it so adaptable and ultimately essential for our survival.
I think that's a great takeaway, and it leaves us with something to ponder. As you go about your day, think about your own memories. What events stand out? What details are you absolutely certain of? And how might some of the factors we've discussed have played a role in shaping those recollections?
That's a great question for all of us to consider. And on that note, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into memory lane. It's been a fascinating exploration of the power and the pitfalls of our amazing fallible minds.
Until next time, folks, keep those memories in check.
And always be questioning.